Nonetheless, this was a Botswana delegation, and we covered both the officials, ministerial, and the summit itself. The issues raised were fundamental, very important to food production and sustainability. As you know, when you talk of fertilizer, it seems like a simple thing. We just think it's just manure. But there are a variety of reasons why the summit was important. Because it's about regulation. It's about how we should either, it's not just production, it's to help growth of the plants, the crops that produce our food, but it is also about the thereafter. Even if it's about vegetables, for instance, are using pesticide, are using the right products to clean the vegetables. And it cannot be left unregulated if we want Africa not only to be self-sufficient in food, but to also be healthy. You must take care of consumer protection.
How do you make out of from the action plan that was raised, or the consensus that was raised? How do you make something out of it?
The action plan is forthright, is positively aggressive. It is now about implementation. The commitment is there in terms of the speeches that were made, but we have to go forth now and do implementation. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of regulation. When you do regulation, you introduce regimes in place that will allow you to control, not really control is not the right word, regulation is the right word. And it's all about, the most important thing to say is that it's all about production of food in Africa and sustainability thereof. You don't want once in a while windfall harvests. You want a situation where you're actually producing food. And the fertilizer that you use, we need variety. We need diversification of what we grow. And the different fertilizers that are used, we import the right fertilizers. We have fertilizers sometimes that we use and then they produce more weeds. We have to be careful of the fertilizers that we buy, we give to the farmers, we import into our countries. We need to be in charge, and that's what Africa is doing.
If you look at the composition of people, leaders that are here, mostly were from the southern part of Africa. I don't know if you realize that, and what do you think might have happened to it?
Well, it's, if you want to put it in geographical terms, it's more like sub-Saharan Africa, isn't it? But we did have people from up north, Morocco, for instance, Egypt. Sub-Saharan Africa is the one that is most likely to be interested in the regulatory aspect of it, because it is the place that is hardest hit in terms of food production deficits. So that's why we look like we are in large numbers. But then we are also the majority in Africa, that basically the numbers speak for that. We need to up the game in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of food production. Countries that are already doing very, very well, for instance, Kenya, where I'm based, Uganda, which I also cover, Rwanda, which I also cover, they're doing very, very well. And you see that in South Sudan also, I see them catching up. In Botswana, the marvel was when we actually reduced the import bill, the food import bill. That amount of money that we made, which actually enhanced our reserves, shows that we can make profit out of agriculture. Now, if you talk about the African Fertilizer Summit, if we up the game in terms of how best we can enhance our crop production, our food production, as we did in Botswana, we'll no longer be saying that because you are semi-arid, because you have desertification problems, because you have drought, it doesn't mean you cannot produce food.
The vice president was here. How did you make of the presence of the vice president was here in Kenya for the summit?
I was very, very happy that His Honor the Vice President was here. You know, the reason why he's here is division of labor. We are aggressively approaching issues that we need to address in order to capture the niche markets in the world. His Excellency the President is on a trip elsewhere, and then His Excellency the Acting President had to come over here. Of course, when he was here, he was His Honor the Vice President. But he participated as a representative of his principal, our principal, His Excellency the President. There was nothing missing in there because his teamwork, and he was just as impressive as any other head of state, as committed, as articulate, and as forthright. So it was a very successful summit.
The Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit that we just concluded right now had precursors before that. In 2003, there was a summit in Maputo, Mozambique, which focused on agriculture and food security, which was still a concern that as a continent that primarily depends so much on the productivity of the agricultural sector, the livelihoods of our people, majority of them live off the land and on the agricultural sector. So there was the Maputo Declaration of 2003, which focused on agriculture and food security, 2003. And what had to be done to improve agriculture so as to enhance food security. Following that, in 2006, as member states of the African Union, we met in Abuja, Nigeria, wherein the focus was on the use of fertilizers because there was realization and belief that use of fertilizers effectively and efficiently would enhance the productivity of the agricultural sector in order to enhance food security. So we agreed on the Abuja Declaration on the use of fertilizer, where some targets were set. For instance, 50 kilograms of fertilizer per hectare per annum. So that was the goal that was set. And as we speak today in Nairobi, the statistics indicate that only 10 countries, Botswana fortunately being amongst them, I think also Kenya, Uganda, and other countries, I cannot recall them offhand. 10 out of 55 member states have met the set target of 50 kilograms of fertilizer per hectare per annum. So this was still a concern that was there. And from 2006 in Abuja, on the belief that utilization of fertilizer will increase the productivity of the agricultural sector, we met again in Malabo. And the theme of the Malabo summit was accelerated growth in the agricultural sector. Still, it was found that if you talk of accelerating production and growth, it means that you realize that from 2003, 2006, 2014, yet you haven't met much of the targets. It's really a challenge. So
maybe I want us to go back to the 10 countries that have managed to do something. Maybe 50% of utilization of fertilizer and agriculture, Botswana being them. And most of these countries that are in Southern Africa, if you look at the numbers.
In East Africa.
At the AU, what are they saying is the main concern? What's the problem with other countries in terms of rolling out fertilizers in their countries?
The very first major challenge is the fact that our consumption of fertilizer is solely based on imports. we still don't have the capacity to produce sufficient fertilizer in Africa for our own consumption. We have the policies, but we have the challenge in terms of being able to produce. So this is dependent on imports. And when you look at the imports, for instance, if you look at the geopolitical situation in the world right now, especially as to what is happening in the, let's say, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, you can see what has happened after the eruption of the conflict. Fertilizer prices went up, and when you are dependent on imports, and whatever happens, any shocks that are occasioned by the geopolitical situation certainly affects you. So it's very costly for us to do that, and it's not sustainable. So what has been decided now in Nairobi, either through the 10-year Africa program on fertilizers and soil health, is that we have to ramp up production of fertilizers in the continent, starting from the national, the regional, and at continental levels. There is a firm belief and conviction that if we can do that, we'll be better placed to move on in terms of healthy utilization of fertilizers, effective utilization of fertilizers, because you also have to know that this is a supplement, and doing much more research into the types of soils that we have. Soil mapping is going to be very critical after the Nairobi Declaration, not after, within the 10-year Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan. So we realize that one of the challenges that we face is our inability to produce fertilizer. We are dependent on that. So we agreed under the Nairobi Declaration, which is actually a commitment by the member states at head of state level, at summit level, that in order for us to make the soil productive, let us look at its health. How do we also, by looking at the health of the soil, enhance its productivity to really get the yields that we want? You cannot depend on imports. We have to do more research. We have to have the institutional mechanisms and the rightful policies. For instance, the intention or the call from the Nairobi Declaration is the involvement of the private sector to be able to produce sufficient fertilizer, and that is soil specific and crop specific. This is what is agreed under the Nairobi Declaration in order to meet the challenges that we face as opportunities. If you have a local capacity to produce, you are also working on the investment within our various nations, within the regions and continentally.